I just wanted to jump on and do another lecture in our Spartan Scholars preview series. And I'm going to be using a little bit different format. Obviously, Will has done some of the lectures where he does them live, where he has a webinar and everybody can ask him questions. And I wanted to try out this other platform where we use Kaltura Capture, which is a platform at MSU, to kind of test a pre-recorded lecture. Obviously, if you have any questions, you can email us at debate@msu.edu, and there's some materials that we have that you can follow along with the lecture. So just some housekeeping things before we get started. You can find on our website two sets of materials. First is the slideshow slides. So if you're having trouble seeing them or there's something that you want to look at more closely, you can download those directly. And then the second thing is a blank notes outline. So if you want to take notes with the lecture or follow along, that would be a great thing to kind of download and have open as we're going. And a great thing about the online content is you can just pause me. So if you don't have that, go ahead and hit pause and grab them and then jump back on. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about with this platform is the video arrangement. And so it's easiest and best to kind of view this lecture in particular if you make the talking head the small picture and the slides the big picture. And then if you move me to the upper right hand corner by clicking and dragging, it won't overlap on any of the slides. So it's a great way to kind of view the lecture, but again, you kind of play with it, see what you like best. That's kind of the whole point of this, is beta testing just a bunch of different platforms and a bunch of different ways to kind of get online content to all of you. So let's get right into kind of what the lecture is going to be about. So you're at the halfway point in the year. You've obviously had a bunch of affirmative debates, and I want to talk about how to innovate your AF at the halfway point. So why is this innovation important? The simplest answer, if you're kind of following along at home, is you want to win more. And obviously the point of turning me on or having this on your screen right now is that you want to learn how to win more. And that's the overall importance, but there's lots of other reasons that now is a good time to kind of review where you're at in the year and with your AF. So the first thing that you kind of know now that you didn't at the beginning of the year is negative strategies. You know what people are saying generally, you know what specific teams are saying as their negative strategy, and you can kind of identify weaknesses in your affirmative relative to what is specifically being read on the topic by negative teams. At this point, you also know your affirmative strengths. So what are things that you go for a lot in the 2AR? What are things that lots of judges are giving you positive feedback? What are some things maybe at this point in the year that you know are weaknesses? Is there something that you've gone for in a debate and the feedback from the judges has just been like, I don't know, it's just not quite good enough. And so you can kind of tweak your AF given those things. And that kind of leads into the third thing, which is judge feedback. Obviously at this point in the year, you've had a bunch of debates, you kind of have gotten a chance to see a bunch of different judges, and you can incorporate that into the way that you're tweaking your AF at the semester break. The other thing that makes it important is just open source. It ages me, but this wasn't it wasn't used as much when I was a student, or not to the extent that it is now. And now you all kind of have a great opportunity to see what's been read by other teams that read your AF, what teams have said in negative rounds, and just have kind of a bigger picture on what exactly is being talked about on the topic. And so it's a great time to kind of go ahead and tweak your AF. So I'm sure you all are like, that's enough. I get it. I'm here to win. I get that it's important. How do I do it? And so there are a couple of different ways to actually change your AF or change the plan in small ways and big ways to kind of tweak it at the semester break. So the first thing, it reads on here, narrow the plan, but I would think of it more as narrowing the AF to avoid specific disads or counter plans or critiques or whatever it is that you're talking about. So is there a way that your AF right now is really big that you can make it smaller and more specific to avoid core negative strategies? So just as an example, on the college topic, the affirmatives have to cooperate in space with either China or Russia. And a lot of AFs are cooperating, or at least they were at the beginning of the year, with China over space situational awareness, which is SSA. And a lot of negative teams were saying that sharing SSA data with China would upset deterrence. And the AF win percentage on that was really, in my opinion, pretty bad at the beginning of the year. And so there's been a variety of ways that teams have kind of dealt and reacted to that specific issue. The card that's up here right now, the Whedon card, is from Cal GF's wiki, and I thought that they had a really great strategy kind of at the Kentucky round robin or Kentucky, I can't totally remember, to tweak their AF to have an angle against the deterrence counterplan, the deterrence DA, and to avoid links to it. And so what they did is, instead of sharing all situational awareness data with China, they only shared space weather data. So they basically changed their entire AF to just be a subsection of space situational awareness to be just about space weather. And so that, sharing space weather data with China doesn't have as many obvious overlaps with the military or deterrence capabilities or whatever. And so it had a really good angle or no link argument against teams that were going to try to read deterrence against them. And I think that's kind of a great example of ways that you can kind of narrow the plan to be, not the broadest version of it that you maybe had in the preseason. So if, for example, you've just ended all arms sales to Saudi Arabia, is there a way to end a specific type of arms sales? Or, if you've ended arms sales broadly to a bunch of different countries, is there a way to narrow that to just one or two countries, or, change it up that way to avoid core negative strategies? Another great way to kind of narrow the plan or change the plan is to think about the way that politics fits in. Obviously, the strength of politics has waxed and waned dramatically over the last couple of years. But if it is kind of a thing that a lot of people are going for against you, it's a great opportunity to change the plan. Is there an actor that avoids politics? Is there a process that is less controversial? Obviously, people have read AFs that go through the Supreme Court. Maybe that doesn't make as much sense on this topic, but it's just kind of something to think about. If politics is a big dissat area on the topic, what are some ways you can change your AF to avoid that big dissat area that maybe don't even require a ton of work or, a bunch of original research or whatever? I think, maybe in this Cal example isn't perfect. I don't think they had read space weather before they read this version of the plan, but you could have advantages that are subcomponents of your broader plan that you already have. And so by just narrowing the plan or narrowing the focus of the AF and reading those more narrow advantages, you can kind of maybe avoid some of the negative, negative strategies that are popular on the topic. The second kind of way to avoid negative arguments is to think about whether or not you can read the counterplan as your AF. Obviously, this sounds really vague, and obviously that would be great if you could just read the counterplan as the AF. This will kind of age me, but on the immigration topic, the college immigration topic, there was a lot of discussion about the process that you use to give people visas. And so there were a bunch of different process counterplans about how exactly you gave visas to different people or whatever. And UGA at the Kentucky round robin actually read as their AF one of those process counterplans. And so obviously then the negative struggles because they don't have that, and you could potentially have built-in advantages that are about the process. So are there kind of process counterplans or, picks maybe, or something where you could read what kind of the negative strategy has been as the counterplan as the AF? I don't know, just something to kind of think about. The last thing I have on here is wording changes, and I would think about those as kind of wording changes to the plan. Just are there kind of ways that you can change your plan at this year or at this point in the year to avoid things that the negative is saying or competition to different arguments? And so one thing that kind of came to mind, in the college topic, the resolution uses this phrase, national space policy. And that means a lot of different things, and it's been used by a lot of negatives as counterplan competition ground. So, Emory kind of from the jump has had a bunch of different stuff about the NSP or National Space Policy pick, but it's kind of picking up steam. So it's a good time, I think, if you have a wording in your plan that is resolutional, or a lot of people are reading picks, is there a way that you can kind of change that wording or tweak the plan just to kind of avoid having that resolutional language or counterplan competition or whatever else is giving you trouble in the plan? The last example that I wanted to kind of talk about for wording change also is from the college topic, and this is actually something that MSU did at the Kentucky tournament. So this green card, the yellow highlighting is one of the common deterrence link arguments that people had been reading against the space situational awareness app. And so it basically says if we share a bunch of extra stuff with China, that would be bad. It could potentially give them the capability to attack us with ASATs. What we found was when we went back to the original article and looked at it, in the conclusion section, Green kind of explains, yeah, that would be true if we broadly shared a bunch of our data. But if we shared basic orbital data on non-sensitive satellites, it wouldn't link to the deterrence DA. Obviously, he doesn't say wouldn't link to the deterrence DA, but that's the gist of what he's getting at kind of in the conclusion. And so what we did was we changed our plan to, instead of just saying share space situational awareness data, we changed it to say basic orbital data on non-sensitive satellites. And it allowed us to kind of be able to read the green card as an affirmative card and say, yes, it's true for a lot of the examples that you're talking about. Obviously, it would link to the ASATs DISAD, the deterrence DISAD, there would be military components of it. However, in this specific example, using this specific phrase, it would avoid a lot of those DISAD links. And so it's just kind of a way where, researching a little bit about what the negative team is saying, allowed us to say that in the plan. And we didn't really change very much of our AF at all. It just was that sort of something that we included in the plan, and then it gave us kind of a wider swath of things that we could potentially say against the deterrence DA. Before I move on, I just want to say I did remove some text from this card, but it was just so it would fit on the PowerPoint presentation. But if you were going to, for example, take this, I would originally research it just so that everybody kind of knows what's going on with that. So the next section I have is kind of how to use your 1AC to make your AF more strategic at the halfway point. And obviously some of the things I just talked about involve the 1AC, like they're potentially where you read your plan, they're where you read your advantages, stuff like that. But there are lots of different ways to just think about using your AF to have offense against what it is that negative teams are saying, or using what negative teams say to come up with ways to kind of innovate your 1AC. So the first thing I kind of have on here is the link turn approach. Like I kind of was talking about, the deterrence DISAD is really big on the college topic about, sharing space data with either China or Russia. And so U of M has read a bunch of different advantages that are basically these huge long deterrence cards that are here are all of the ways that the AF could turn deterrence. It increases attribution, it increases ally cooperation, it creates it links us to Chinese assets, just a bunch of different stuff, and these super long cards. And that's kind of one of those things where if you waited for the negative team to read the deterrence DA, and then in the 2AC, you tried to read all of these big, long deterrence cards, link turn cards to deterrence, you would be in a tough spot because they're really long, they're really highlighted, they go into a lot of detail. And so it's a situation where kind of moving that to the 1AC and reading a deterrence advantage, for example, or a warfighting advantage or whatever, kind of gives you more flexibility there because you can read your big, long cards. And then if the negative team says deterrence, then you kind of have already your big, long, good cards that link turn deterrence already in the 1AC. So, is there something on the high school topic that is similar? Is there something that you find yourself wanting to kind of link turn a lot, but they're really long cards or something like that? Deterrence could very well be a thing on the high school topic. I'm sure it is. And so thinking about whether or not, if you have kind of that opportunity to move some of that stuff to the 1AC, and have your advantage be kind of your big link turn cards to the DISAD. Another way to kind of do that is to think about impact turning DISADs in the 1AC. So what I mean by that is, you take something that is considered a DISAD and then you read the impacts the other way. And, on the high school topic, there's kind of all of these weapons shift arguments. Like if the US stops selling to Saudi Arabia, they'll buy from Russia instead, and that's bad because Russian influence or whatever. Is that potentially an opportunity to kind of read that as an advantage? So, say as your 1AC, the plan stops them from buying from the United States. That causes them to buy from Russia, but that's good because it improves the Russian economy or whatever else. There's obviously a bunch of different things that you can kind of say there. And obviously, it's a little bit different than kind of the link turn strategy that I described, which is you're not really using it necessarily to preempt or read all of your best cards, but I find that at the semester break, I'm starting to kind of run out of ideas for what different advantages we could read, or just ways to kind of beef up the 1AC, have it have a little bit of a different look. And so if you're kind of at a place where you're feeling like your app is a little bit stale, or you're looking for new impacts to read, or new advantages even, thinking about the negative strategies and then whether or not you can read them as advantages, just reading the impacts the other way, or I guess, in the other example, the link turns the other way, is kind of a way to give a new twist to your 1AC at the halfway point in the year. The last thing on this is kind of just preempts or things to complicate the things that the negative team says. Obviously, all of the things that I just said, like the link turn strategy, you're using the 1AC to preempt it. And it doesn't need to be as ham-handed as just being like, okay, next, our preempt section. But are there things that you can kind of fold into your advantages that you're finding yourself reading a lot or needing a lot against, negative strategies at this point in the year? So, obviously your 1AC, if it's strategic, is trying to beat what they're going to say in the 1NC. And when you go into the year, you kind of have an idea of that from camps, but you're maybe not totally sure what the negative is going to say. And at this point in the year, you have a huge data set. There's been hundreds, thousands of debates that have occurred. And so what are the negative teams saying in a lot of debates? And then how can you use your 1AC to kind of beat the most common negative arguments? And so when I was kind of thinking about this, I thought about the college topic from last year. And the resolution asked the courts or the Congress to restrain the executive. And the most common negative argument was that the executive should restrain themselves. It was called the Executive Self-Restraint Counterplan. And so instead of having an external restraint, the president would just cease doing the bad stuff. And so at this point in the year, kind of like the halfway point, knowing that that was kind of the most common negative argument, it really only made sense going into the spring semester to think about advantages that had an external restraint warrant. So why is it good for the Congress or the courts to restrain the executive as opposed to just the action stopping? And, going into the second half of the year, if we had just come out with a bunch of like, the executive does this, it's bad. The executive does this, it's bad. It really wouldn't have been very strategic because the most common negative argument was counterplan, executive, don't do it. And so are there things on the high school topic this year that, are coming up a lot that you can kind of, tweak your app or just like turn your app a little bit in a slightly different direction to have angles against those specific arguments? And, there could be other things, other ways to preempt it that don't involve just reading a whole specific advantage. I'll talk about some more like smaller ways to change the 1AC in a second. But, thinking about, is the AF advantage section or AF advantages that we selected in September, is that still strategic knowing what we know now? And the answer might be yes. Maybe you nailed it. Maybe you knew exactly what the negative was going to say. But the flip side of that is you have a bunch more data now. And so are there ways to kind of preempt in the 1AC common negative arguments or to have an angle against them? I think this comes up a lot in critique debates too. Obviously, like if the other team is going to question your like security representations, which is like securitization, something that Will talked about, are there ways to pick and choose a 1AC that is more strategic in that situation where you have a better defense of your reps or your method or whatever against specific teams, or just kind of knowing what is common against your app? I don't know, lots of different ways to kind of think about it as it relates to the high school topic, but it's a great time to really go back to the foundations of your 1AC and think about, is this the best 1AC given where the topic is at now? The next situation, the next slide or the next section that I want to talk about is utilizing open source. This is generally useful, and maybe it could be kind of a whole other mini lecture, whatever, about how to utilize it. And it definitely undergirds a lot of the other stuff that I was kind of talking about. It's really tough to know how do you change your affirmative to avoid X or Y thing if you kind of don't know what X or Y thing really is. And so I would just really encourage you to utilize open source as a way to scout and keep a list of kind of what other people are saying about your app. So starting with creating a list of people that read the same app as you. So, if you're GBN and Woodward reads the same app as you want to know what is going on in Woodward's app debates, because those are the things most likely to come up in your debates. And, in high school, there are so many teams and schools that more than likely someone is reading something at least similar to you. And so you want to kind of have a list of people that read the same apps as you, and then as a very foundational thing, scout what negative teams are saying against them and what negative teams are saying against your other teams. If you're from a big school and a bunch of people read your app, you should have a list somewhere of what all the other teams have said against your app in specific debates. And then, by scouting that and knowing what negative teams are saying, you can use that intel to build 1AR blocks or, highly contingent 2AC blocks. So, when Carrollton reads this impact to the USMCA dissad, I'm going to read this wall. And, your block header or your F6 or whatever in your paperless file says, A2 pharma impact USMCA Carrollton. And you kind of have like a very, very hyper specific version of what you would say against it. And, a lot of people, I think, realize the value of that when they're at camp. If you're at the SDI and you're in Bill Batterman's lab and Will Repko's lab turns out a new affirmative or something, it makes a lot of sense to you that you would have specific blocks to all the different stuff that's there. But that same thing is true throughout the year. If you scout different teams and keep a list of what is being read, how it's being read, what about their specific argument makes it different, then you can really use that to build really advanced blocks and strategies. And as you start to see patterns, so, this team always goes for politics. It guides kind of what your 1AC might be against those specific teams. Or, this is a deterrence team. Then that's an example of a situation where you might want to read your big deterrence link turn strategy 1AC. And so just thinking about, using all of the data that you have available to you to kind of predict what people are going to say in the general sense. So like, what are lots of people going for? How do I want to, change the app as it relates to that? And then also in the specific sense, what about what they're saying is different and how can I kind of react to that specifically? And then the last thing I have on here is get inspiration, which I think is a little bit different than maybe what you would think of as like direct incorporation. So, if someone else is reading an app similar to you, use that as a starting point for you to kind of get ideas for ways that you could tweak your app. The example that I gave where MSU changed their plan to use the phrase basic orbital data is kind of an example of that. Like, we went back, we researched the original Green article, we saw the conclusion was a little bit different, and then we utilized that. I liked U of M's deterrence advantage, and we read a similar app to them, but if I had just gone to the wiki and taken those cards wholesale, it wouldn't be as strategic for us because you don't learn it because you're not originally researching it. You're behind from the jump because a bunch of other people have had all of these debates, and you kind of leave yourself vulnerable because you don't have backlines, depending on what the negative team does. So just hypothetically imagine that you borrow heavily or directly incorporate from another team's wiki an advantage that ends in the Internet of Things. And it seems really good, it seems really strategic, you just take it, you're like, oh, I need a new advantage, I'm just going to read it. Well, if you haven't originally researched that, you might not realize that there are a bunch of impact turns to Internet of Things. And so you kind of are leaving yourself vulnerable. But if you kind of use the wiki as an inspiration, like this team is reading thematically something that I like, or a few cards, or a specific scenario, and use that to kind of jumpstart some of your research, that's a great example of how you can kind of best utilize open source, as opposed to just kind of taking someone else's work and then copy and pasting it into your file. Personally, I think that leaves you really vulnerable to a lot of arguments. And, if we're kind of talking about what can you do to maximize your chances to win on the F, that would be pretty bad advice to give you, because originally researching it and using it as inspiration as opposed to incorporating it directly is going to be the most effective way that you can have to kind of maximize your chances to win. The last slide I have is small tweaks. So what are some small things you can do? And this is a great example of, it's hard over the holiday break to sit down and do debate work. And I understand that. I've been doing this for a long time, even kind of being on the other side of competition as a coach. It's really tough. You've just kind of come off of a really busy semester. You obviously most people don't have school, and so you don't have as much structured time. And so it's hard to find kind of 5 hours or whatever where you're like, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write a new app. That's really difficult. And so if you can break it down into just a couple small things that are, 10 minutes here, 20 minutes here, an airplane ride to your winter vacation, or, just something to kind of keep your head in the game and improve your app in big ways. These are kind of what I would put under that category. So the first is re-highlighting, especially the 1AC. And I think people kind of think they make their 1AC, they're ready to start the year, they have it, and then it kind of becomes like this artifact, which is like, I've highlighted it, I feel good about it, and then it just gets read in every single debate. But as the year progresses, you realize more and more the inefficiencies in your cards, the parts of it that don't matter, the things that you're never really extending or don't really come up. And so it's a great opportunity to kind of revisit your 1AC and say, are there things I could eliminate? Are there things that I want to add in, knowing what the negative team is saying? And it's easy to think it doesn't really matter. But if you're from a bigger squad, or even a squad that has, 3 or 4 teams, if you have 20 words in your 1AC that are inefficient, and then you multiply that over a number of teams and number of AF rounds, that's really a lot of missed opportunity to read more useful stuff in the 1AC. And so it's a great time to pull up high rotation 2AC blocks or the 1AC and kind of re-highlight what exactly you want your card to say, and kind of make sure that you have the most efficient set of stuff in there. The other small thing that you could consider doing is retagging. Is there something that you're having trouble communicating to judges? Is there something consistently that you're getting feedback about where they're like, I didn't understand X or Y thing? Is there a way that you can build that into your tags, either in the 1AC or 2AC blocks or whatever else, that, would really help you kind of communicate more effectively what it is that you're trying to say? Not always the case, but definitely something to kind of think about. And then the third thing I have on the small tweak side is reorganize. So one really easy example is, should you remove a part of the 1AC that never comes up? Is there something that you included in the preseason that you thought would be really important, but hasn't really borne out? So just as an example, MSU at the beginning of the year had a card in our 1AC that said bilateral approaches to SSA sharing are better than multilateral approaches. And the multilateral counterplan has come up, but we really didn't find ourselves using it in very many of our AF debates, or certainly not something that we were going for in the 2AR. And so that was a card that we just took out somewhere over the course of the last semester and replaced it with something that was more useful to us. And so there are lots of examples. Is there an impact scenario that you never go for because you're not comfortable with it? Would that be better as something else? Having kind of that discussion of whether or not you can remove something and reorganize the 1AC, I think is a great time at the semester break. The other thing you can think about doing is adding something of high value. So are you constantly finding yourself reading a card in the 2AC? And is there a way to weave that into the 1AC? Impact defense obviously is really popular. And maybe it's a situation where teams don't really have a lot of great answers to your internal link scenario. So they're constantly going for terminal impact defense. Is that a situation where if you added a card in the 1AC that was a pro-dite for your terminal impact, it would give you a lot of ground in a debate, because then you wouldn't have to read it in the 2AC, you would have a more robust impact when you kind of go to give the judge your stuff at the end of the debate. So something like a terminal impact booster or a link term that you're always reading, or just, I don't know, like it could be anything, a topic uniqueness argument or a deterrence card. Is there a way to kind of fold that into the 1AC to save yourself time in the 2AC, knowing now that you're constantly reading it? There are tons of tweaks that you can make to blocks at this point in the year. You know, for the 2AC, is it in the order that you like? Personally, I like the 2AC blocks for the most part to go from best to worst. But, you know, is there a way that you could present the 2AC block in an order that would be more effective? Are you constantly not getting to a card that you really needed or wanted? Maybe it's time to move that up. Re-highlighting 2AC blocks and really going through and thinking, okay, in what percentage of debates have I gone for this argument? In what percentage have I gone for this argument? And if the answer is, you know, never or rarely, then thinking about, should that be a different argument? Should it be prioritized differently? And you have the data from all your AF debates at this point in the year to kind of make that call. And so it's a great time to kind of think about your block. And I kind of already said re-highlighting, but it's a great time to re-highlight 2AC blocks, especially now that you have some downtime. I feel like at the beginning of the year, when you're trying to get out to your first tournament, it's a rush to get going. And so, you know, now you have a little bit of a break potentially, and it would be a good time to kind of look through and highlight or re-highlight your 2AC blocks, especially like the top 5 or 10 most high rotation blocks, because those are the ones that you would, you know, like if you did the thing where I was talking about, where it's like 20 words times speeches, whatever, times number of rounds, like those are the ones that you're losing the most efficiency on because you're reading them the most often. Another thing you can kind of do at the semester break, and it's good to kind of do throughout the year, is change just like the cards in your blocks to prevent staleness. So if the same people judge you all the time, or, you know, you debate the same teams over and over again, and you feel like you're just kind of, you've read your cards a bunch of times, so you have other cards that make similar arguments as well, it's a good time, honestly, to kind of like just switch it out. There's a judge psychology to reading, you know, this same card for the 100th time, or hearing the exact same block for the 10th time. And if you just kind of tweak that a little bit, it can really boost kind of the credibility that your arguments are given with your judges. The last thing I'll kind of say, and if you've ever heard me give like a lecture at a camp before, you know I talk about this all the time, but just generally how important blocks are. And I've talked about it in the course of this lecture, and I'm sure if I do another one, it'll come up again. But you know so much about what other teams are saying at this point in the year. And you can have so many blocks based on that by using what other teams have said and incorporate, you know, that read similar apps as you, and incorporating them, by originally researching against negative teams' arguments, by using other friends on your team, whatever it is, to kind of have a huge set of blocks. And so, you know, another small thing that you can do if you only have a couple minutes is say, you know, I'm going to take 10 minutes and write a no-link block for the 1AR against NBA's deterrence to SAD. You know, I don't even know if that exists, but if it did. And that process is such a small thing, but it could pay such huge dividends because other people might read similar things. You might debate NBA, whatever it is. And so that's ways to kind of like break up the bigger thing into smaller pieces over the course of the holiday break and really have a high payout for kind of what it is that you are kind of thinking about doing. And so when you're thinking about reorganizing, retagging, rehighlighting, are there ways to kind of just reblock or block out some specific things for specific contingencies that you know at this point in the year are going to come up a lot? So I was aiming to be at about 30 minutes, and I'm clocking in at about 34 minutes, which is not bad. So I almost covered, which is basically like being a 2N. But I do want to say just thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for trying out these beta testings with us. I'd love to answer questions about the content of this lecture, but I'd also love to answer questions about the SDI or about the platform that we use. So if you have any feedback like that, definitely email us at debate@msu.edu. And the website that's on there, debate.msu.edu, is our website where you can find more information about the SDI, or kind of the new thing that we're going to be doing in summer 2020, where some of the SDI, the Spartan Scholars, has some content online before and after the camp. And if you have any questions about that, definitely let me know. And good luck improving your AFs, and I'd love to see some AF win percentages out there increase in the second semester based on anything you kind of heard here. So thank you again, and don't hesitate to let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.